What all started in just a humble garage had gotten way out of hand. One man, Dennis Videogames, had taken the gaming industry by storm, building his company, Studio Dennis, from the ground up with famous titles such as Minotaur Surgeon, Who Spilt My Milk, Again, and his most successful endeavour, a virtual pet game named Please Look After My Tortoise, which scored a whopping 9.25 across the board. Having stacked up a healthy 5 million schmecks in his bank account, Dennis was moving up in the world, purchasing a beautiful office in the big city, or I don't know, it's hard to tell what's outside those windows. And now that he was a proper game developer with a proper office, it was time to start taking this whole thing very, very seriously. No longer would he make stupid kids games like Dennis Sports. He was somebody now, and he needed to make games that meant things to mature, like-minded people. Dennis searched through the list of topics he could research and settled almost immediately on post-apocalypse. Yes, perfect. His next game would be gritty and graphic and signal to the world that Studio Dennis was cutting edge. He would call it World of Pain and Suffering. Oh yeah, that sounds deep. A role-playing game in which you wander around a miserable wasteland, doing quests such as picking up empty tin cans and shoveling piles of radioactive fecal matter. Dennis decided to focus particularly on sound for this game so that you could really hear people's agonizing screams in high definition. And after a good solid day of pretending to cry into his microphone, the game was finished. All that was left to do was hit publish, and the critics would finally take him seriously. But oh, Dennis, just before he could press send, he accidentally added a bug to the game. Well, it was too late now. Hopefully it wouldn't affect the overall gameplay too much. Unfortunately though, the bug in question meant that upon talking to any NPC, Dennis's full library of crying and wailing MP3s started playing on an infinite loop in the background. And as this could be considered by some as game-breaking, when the reviews came in, they were not so kind. A 3 from Star Games, a 3 from Game Hero, a solid 5 from Informed Gamer, so whoever runs that magazine is probably a masochist. Overall though, the game was a monumental flop, generating less money than it cost to make in the first place. It turns out that playing sad games about being alone wasn't most people's idea of fun. And now that Dennis thought about it, that was a pretty accurate reflection of his real life as well. He had bought this fancy new office with bookshelves and a table, and he even had a water cooler, but nobody to grab a drink with. What he needed in his company was, well, company. It was decided, and Dennis began making a vacancy advert straight away. The main thing to decide was how much money to put into this staff search. He considered going all guns blazing, but then he remembered he quite liked being rich, and so a modest 20k would do. Within moments, the list of applicants came back. There was Dennis Hababis. Hold on. No. What are the chances? There was only room for one Dennis in this office. How about Anne Martin then? He couldn't quite figure out whether this was an application from a woman named Anne or a statement that there was a man named Martin. Considering these were the only two people who had applied though, and the intrigue was killing him, he decided to hire the second option. And when they arrived, well, Dennis was none the wiser. His desk was positioned so that he could only see the back of Anne Martin's head. But oh well, Anne or Martin, it didn't matter to him one bit. The only important thing was that they could make a real humdinger of a video game. And the early signs were there, as they got straight to work researching the Wild West. Now that was an angle that Dennis hadn't considered. Perhaps he could make a mature, and dare he say it, profound game about life in cowboy times. It would still be gritty and depressing, but with a thoughtful perspective on the slower pace of life in old-fashioned rural America. He would call it Riding a Horse and Thinking. The game would of course still be an adventure, but the distance between each quest would be extremely far, giving the player a lot of time to just ride on a horse and bask in their own thoughts. Dennis was sure he'd be collecting awards as if they were Please Look After My Tortoise cards. He had brought out a trading card game based on his previous success, so it was to his surprise that when the game released, oh my god, it's even worse reading than before. Do you know what though? I blame Anne for this one. She contributed like one technology point to the entire thing. Although it's weird, on doing some market research, Dennis found a lot of the complaints described the game as boring. No, it couldn't be that, he thought as he resisted the temptation to fire Anne Martin on the spot. But Dennis had a big heart, and instead of letting her go straight away, he decided to give her some training. She would focus on getting better at technology, and he would focus on improving his design skills. Together they would make the perfect team, and what's this? Something about sending employees on vacation? No, you have to be kidding me. After that one tiny bit of research, Anne is already asking for a holiday. You just got here. I thought we hired a professional game developer, not a professional wet wipe. Unbelievable. Right, Dennis was fed up with this, and with Anne jetting off on a Caribbean cruise, he got to work searching for another, better staff member. This time he would do things correct, investing a whopping £2 million into the job search. Only the best of the best would compete to be his new business partner. So let's see here. Wendy Webb, Kiri Wolftill. Aha! Deborah Blake. Look at those technology points, yes. Deborah was the one. By the time Deborah had arrived and completed her orientation, Anne had returned from the Dominican Republic. She wasn't too happy to see that she had been replaced, but having received word that G3, the world's leading gaming convention, was on the horizon, this presented a perfect opportunity. To hell with being mature, Dennis needed to make money, and so he was returning to what he knew best. With his new crack team of co-workers, he would revive one of his oldest and goldest franchises, this time with a fresh, exciting twist. An extreme sports simulator? It could only mean one thing. Production had begun on Dennis Sports Resort. A sequel to the roaring success that was Dennis Sports, this game would take the concept further with new sports such as squirrel shooting, parkour, Quidditch, and Spanish bullfighting. The game would be based around the fictional location of Doohoo Island, and with the Segway Tour mode, players would be able to explore their beautiful subtropical surroundings. The concept was perfect, and all three of them working till they had carpal tunnel, coloured blobs firing left, right, and centre. The game was finished, and it was a masterpiece. I mean, that's not the worst set of reviews I've ever seen. Maybe a bit much to call it a masterpiece, but falls a bit short. Yet that's the whole point of squirrel shooting, you're literally supposed to fall. Not to worry, because there was still G3 to look forward to. A game convention was a great way to garner exposure, and although a large booth was a hefty 1.5 million schmecks, Dennis still had 2 million in the bank, and with a great game such as Dennis Sports Resort on sale, they were sure to make it all back anyway. So came convention day, and the visitors rolled up in their droves. Wow, look at that, 174,000 people, and yet it still wasn't enough to get them in the top 100 booths of that year. Also, hold on, Dennis wasn't making quite as much money as he had predicted he would. It was almost as if people weren't interested in buying a solid 5.75 out of 10 and were buying other games instead. This didn't bode well, and it was in this moment of panic that Dennis received a rather mysterious email. It was written in code, and upon having Deborah decrypt it for him, he couldn't believe his luck. Apparently, if he just mailed £87,000 to this random unidentified address, they would sabotage his competitors for him. That sounded convenient. Lo and behold, a few days later, Dennis's biggest rivals, Epoch Games, just happened to have milk poured all over their computer server room. Oh, how unfortunate. Perhaps they should purchase Who Spilt My Milk to find out who did it. Oh, hoo, hoo, hoo. Speaking of which, with his bank account not looking quite as healthy as it once did, it was about time Dennis revived another of his beloved franchises. This time he chose to make a spin-off game for the Minotaur Surgeon series, which he would name Help! My Hippogriff! Hit by a car! In the game, you roleplay as a doctor who has to perform life-saving surgery on hippogriffs that have been injured in increasingly more severe motorway accidents. This was obviously an ingenious idea, so along with the backing of a small magazine campaign, it was no surprise to find that, in the eyes of the critics, Help My Hippogriff Hit by a Car was an absolute triumph. It was such a relief to see numbers such as 7 and 8 again. Dennis was, for the first time, confident in his new employees' abilities, and this newfound team spirit couldn't have come soon enough, as G3 was just around the corner again. In need of a game to advertise at this year's medium booth, they couldn't afford to spend another £2 million on a large one. Dennis decided he trusted his co-workers so much that he would allow Anne Martin to direct their next project. Ever since her Caribbean holiday, Anne had become a big fan of planes. As a result, an airplane casual game named If You Must Crash, Make It Small seemed like a good idea. They would make this game for the handheld console, the Gameling, so that people could take it with them on commercial flights, thus creating a phenomenon known as planeception. Dennis had his reservations as to whether this trend would catch on, but he went along with it anyway. And after some heavy promotion at the gaming convention, he was thrilled to see that 65 people were hyped for the game's release. He was less thrilled when Anne Martin then demanded a pay rise. Maybe wait until the game is actually out, Anne. There's no need to jump the gun because, oh, a 4. Probably just a rogue bad review though, I'm sure it's fine, but oh, nope. They're definitely giving it 4s, and a 5 and then a 6. Shows potential. Yeah, well at the moment the only potential I'm seeing is Studio Dennis going into debt. Things had just become very real very quickly. With company funds sitting at just 200k, Anne Martin's first title was only earning them as much as her new pay rise was costing. Do you know what, Anne? You've been stealing a living ever since you walked through that door. Not once had Dennis even had a nice chat round the water cooler with her. And If You Must Crash Make It Small was, well, it was the final straw. Dennis had to make a cutthroat decision, and Anne Martin was fired. It was now up to him and Deborah to get them out of this mess before it got even messier. With his bank account fast approaching the red zone, Dennis would have to rely on the prestige of his most successful title. Would it save him one more time? He would have to make a sequel to Please Look After My Tortoise. As his net worth dropped into the minus numbers, an idea suddenly came to him. Another virtual pet game. But instead of looking after someone's animal, in this one you are given the details to their bank account and you have to care for their financial status instead. He would call it Please Look After My Crippling Debt. Stage 1 of production complete, minus 50k. By the end of stage 2, they were down to minus 100. He received a letter from the bank stating that if they hit minus 200, they were done and dusted. And no, not now, Deborah. We don't have 50k to invest in internet security. Just turn off the firewall if it's getting too expensive, I don't know. We're going all in. And before they could lose any more money, Dennis pressed the finish button. This was the moment of truth. The first reviews came in. And oh good heavens.